In Bash, loops will allow us to keep repeating our code until a condition is met. We have a couple of options. The most popular ones are the while loop, the until loop, and the for loop. The while loop will execute when a condition is true and continue executing until that condition is false. The until loop will execute when a condition is false and continue executing until that condition is true. And the for loop will iterate over a sequence or over an array. At any time, we can break out of these loops by using the break keyword. Let's take a look at a couple of script examples that I've got here. We're going to start with the while_loop script inside of the what are loops directory in our GitHub repo. As always, the link will be in the description. So you see here we have a script to display a series of numbers using a while loop. I'm going to close the terminal here to have more space. We start off with a variable called counter. The value is set to 1. And then we have our while loop, which we start by using the keyword while. Then we have the do keyword, which means while this condition is being met. Let's do the actions inside of here, which in this case would be to print to screen the counter is at, and then the value of the counter, which starts at 1. And then because we want our while loop to end at some point, we're going to increase the value of the counter variable plus 1. And then once all the actions, we've completed all the actions inside, we're going to hit done, and then it's going to continue iterating until the condition is met. And then I just have a final message here to print out to screen the count has finished. Control J to bring up the terminal. And then let's go ahead and execute this while loop. And you see it prints out a bunch of messages for us. The counter is at 1 and it prints that out up until 10. Why does it do it until 10? Well, let's move this down once more, because our condition here is the value of the variable counter. If it is less than 10, then this condition is met. Once it's above 10, so this is now false, well, then it's going to stop. So that's why once it hit 11, this condition now became false and it stopped iterating. Okay, awesome. Now let's move into the until loop script. And similar, this looks pretty similar. The only difference really is that we're using the until keyword. You still have the do keyword and the done, and you still execute the actions that you want your loop to do between the do and the done keyword. But the difference here is this condition here. Now let's first execute this here. Let me move this up here and let's go ahead and type in, actually we'll probably just have to type in until loop. Fantastic. And you see that we have very similar functionality. The counter is at 1 and ends at 10 and the count has finished. But the condition is different here. Instead of using the less than test, we use the greater than test. Why is that? Well, the counter starts at 1. And if we use the less than 1 less than 10, that means true. But remember, until loops will only execute if they're false and stop executing once they are true. So if I change this to less than or equals, and then I run this once more, you can see that it doesn't print anything out except that last message, the count has finished, because it's already true, right? But again, for this to work, we need to use greater than. If you want to use until or while, the, I guess, best convention there to go by is just use the one that makes the most sense. Does it make more sense to test against false or true? That's up to you and your script. Alrighty, let's move into the for loop. Let's open up for loop traditional here. We actually have 2 for loop options. If you're familiar with a language like C#, you might be familiar with the for in to iterate over values inside of an array. Or some kind of sequence. And in Bash, we have that as well. This is the traditional for loop. And what this enables us is to iterate over the values of, in this case, this services variable, which is an array. In Bash, we can define an array by separating each value with a space. So you see I have a space here, a space here, a space here, a space here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values inside of this variable. This I is an index, and you can call this anything, but the convention is to use I unless that's being used somewhere else. Then you could put like J or a different letter there. But we start off with I. So what we're saying is for I in the services array, each time that you iterate over the sequence, this @ symbol is telling the for loop to assign the value in that slot, we'll say, to the I variable. So in this case, it starts out, okay, this value is load balancer, so I will equal load balancer. The next time it iterates, it will equal virtual machine, storage, VNet, container, etc. And inside of our loop, again, we have that same keyword do, similar to what we had in while and until. The difference here is it's just going to echo out the value to the screen. So let's clear our screen here and run our for loop, not new, traditional. Awesome. And you can see it printed out the values of each one of those values inside of our variable. If I removed one of these like this and then ran it once more, it only prints out 4 elements to the screen. Awesome. Let's close both of these, close this as well, and let's go to our for loop new. If you're familiar with a language like C, this for loop might look similar to you. So the difference here is we're still using that for keyword, we're still using the do and the done, but the difference here is inside of our, we no longer have an array here. What we have is, again, we have that same index that we're calling I, but what we're saying here is, okay, our value is going to start at 5. Then as long, in the condition here is the second place here, as long as I is less than 20, we're going to keep iterating. And each time we iterate, we're going to increase the value of I by 2. So let's bring this up and we'll take a closer look once we execute it. So we'll say for loop underscore new. See? And you see the counter starts at 5, and then each time it increments by 2, because that's what we're saying, 5, 7, 9, 11, all up until 19. And it stops because the next iteration would be greater than 20. If I change this to 40, it would keep going until it is greater than 40. Well, until it's not greater than 40, which is 39 in this case. And I can start the value at 0 if I wanted to, then would get a whole many more values printed out the screen. I can increase by 1 if I wanted to. And this loop is useful when you need to make some sort of change to the index or to the value that you're comparing to inside of the loop functionality itself. In previous loops, the conditions have been just conditions, so there have been no changes made. We would have to make the changes to the condition on the inside of the loop, but here we can do it right in the definition above. One last thing I want to show y'all is the loop and break. I mentioned at the beginning that you can use break to break out of a loop even if the condition is being met for the loop. So for example, if we were in a true loop or in a while loop and the condition was still true, if we wanted to break out of it, we could use the break keyword, which is actually what we're doing here. You can see our condition for our while loop is true, and true will always equal true. So essentially this loop will run on forever. Oftentimes this is used to keep your program running if you need more input or something like that. And then you'll use break to break out of it. So the difference here is we have the break keyword here. So that what we're trying to read here is we're asking our user to provide some sort of number between 1 and 25. And then we're saving that to the variable n. Then we're comparing n to make sure that it is greater than 1, but also less than 25. So it is, then it means it's in the range that we want. Then we're just going to print to screen you entered and the value that you entered in. If it's not, we're going to print a message saying you didn't enter a number in range, goodbye, break out of the loop. And then our loop is done. And then we're going to echo break happened. So let's go ahead and run this here. Let's clear the screen and run loop and break here. Awesome. Let's enter a number between 1 and 25. Let's do 4. You entered 4. Let's enter 7. Let's enter 19. And then let's enter a number that's outside of that. Let's enter 34. You didn't enter a number in range. Goodbye, break happened. So even though while true is still true, we are breaking out of the loop using the break keyword. Loops are fantastic. And now that we can pair loops, variables, functions, conditional statements all in one, we have all the building blocks we need to write our first fully functioning bash script. And that's what we're going to do in our next video.